Hi, everybody. Let's talk about population ecology. And we're going to focus on the factors that affect populations and looking at specifically carrying capacity and the different types of growths that happen within populations. All right, so let's get into it. A population size, we're talking about the number of individuals of a population. Those individuals all have to belong to the same species. Now, when we talk about population growth, we need to understand that it can either remain stable or there can be fluctuations. Now, at any time, populations can be having lots of growth or they can be having decline if there is fluctuations happening. When we look at the growth rate or how quickly a population is growing or declining, we can look at the change over time. It's a rate, kind of like a speed of change. And we look at three factors. We look at how many births are taking place. We look at how many deaths are occurring within a population. And we look at the number of individuals that are entering or leaving a population due to different factors. Now, if we know if there are more individuals being born or entering an area, we know that the population is going to increase. If the death rate is about the same as the birth rate, the births and deaths are equaling out, we have about a stable population. And if more organisms are dying than are being born, then we're going to have a population in decline, meaning the population is going to be going down. Now, the first type of growth we often see when we have a low population in an area is exponential growth. This tends to happen when we have a small population with unlimited resources. They have an abundance of space, an abundance of food. There tends to be very few predators, no disease. And so basically, there's no limiting factors. There's nothing limiting the growth of their population. It can just take off. And we call that exponential growth. Exponential growth is going to have that cool U-shaped growth curve. It indicates that we have a high slope, means that we have rapid growth. The larger the population grows, the larger population gets, the faster it goes. Think back to our bacteria and how when you have 64 bacteria doubling, that's going to be much faster than 2 bacteria. So it continues to grow and grow in that way. Now, we talked about this back in bacteria in the first unit, right? 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, and the more you have each time that doubles, it's going to grow even faster. Now, exponential growth happens when members of the population are reproducing at a constant rate, but there's nothing causing them to die over time. So we have lots of births, animals surviving, and very few deaths within the population. Again, these are ideal conditions for the organism, unlimited resources. We call it a J-shaped curve because if you look at it, it looks like the letter J, but this doesn't happen for very long. Limiting factors exist in all populations. As the resources become scarce, there's waste, the growth becomes limited, and all of those factors that eventually slow down the population are considered limiting factors. When those limiting factors come into play, such that the population reaches a point where the resources will only sustain a certain amount, where only a certain number of organisms can live, exponential growth doesn't continue any longer, and we move towards different types of growth. That different type of growth moves us towards our carrying capacity. So what happens that stops exponential growth, leading to the next type of growth we're going to talk about? Food resources becoming scarce, water sources, diseases being introduced, the population running out of space in order to grow, maybe additional being predators, being attracted to the fact that there's more prey. There could be competition between the organisms within the population or competition with other species that already live in there as well that use the same resources. So eventually, all populations reach a carrying capacity in the environment. That means it's not the number of individuals the environment can hold, because it can hold a lot more for a short period of time. It's how many can be supported or sustain or live successfully there for a long period of time. So when we look at carrying capacity curves, there's a couple key points we have to look at. Now, often as they grow exponentially, they grow out of control and they actually will reach a point above the carrying capacity where it becomes overpopulation. And we call that the overshoot point. When that happens, we run out of resources. Often organisms will die due to starvation or they will migrate out of the area and it will drop and they'll have like a correction. It will drop way back down. And we call that the die off. And then after that point, it begins to fluctuate. It will move up and down. The population is never exactly one number, but as births and deaths balance each other out at that population level, it'll move up and down around what we call the carrying capacity. The carrying capacity is just kind of like an average number that the population hangs out around. Now, this type of growth, where exponential growth slows down and eventually levels off, we call this logistic growth. And if you look at it, it kind of looks a little bit like a really stretched out letter S. Now, logistic growth happens when the population size starts to slow down in its growth. The birth rates will start to slow down as well, because you have exponential growth, but then everything slows down as they start to have less food, less water, there's less birth, there's more deaths because of predators or disease. And eventually the growth stops and it becomes a stable population. Now, we never want to make the assumption that carrying capacity is constant, it doesn't change. Things change all the time. So we know that a carrying capacity, once it reaches this level, if there was some big change in the environment, maybe a natural disaster or urbanization, something happened, we could have the carrying capacity drop because of a change in environment. Again, the earth is always changing, things are always changing. So again, this brings us back to the idea of limiting factors: competition within the population and with other species, predation by predators, parasitism and disease, drought, climate extremes, natural disasters. Limiting factors can also be human activity, such as poaching, stealing for the pet trade, or urbanization, agriculture activities. Let's talk about competition. So competition is within a population or within a community. We have the competition for resources. Now, competition increases the more individuals that you have. So the bigger the flock of birds, the larger the herd of buffalo or wildebeest, the more competition there is for those resources. We call that density dependent because the amount of competition is dependent on how many animals there are in the area. Predation. Predation is the interaction between organisms where one kills and eats the other. Now, we know that predator-prey relationships are something that we look at very often in ecology because they are the best known methods for controlling the size of a population. And if we look over here, this graph should look familiar to us. This is a wolf and moose population. This is the graph of the data from the Isle Royale up in Lake Superior in above Michigan, where they tracked the wolf and moose population over time. The wolves are in blue and the moose are in red. We notice that they kind of keep each other in check, that the wolves never have a very high population for very long, and the moose, while at one point they do reach a peak population, they quickly go back down and hang around the carrying capacity. So you can see that predator-prey relationship balances out the populations for both species. So notice that whenever we have an increase in prey, whenever we have more moose, shortly after the moose increase, we start to also see an increase in the predator population. But as systems go, as we have more predators, what's going to happen to the prey? They're going to eat more prey, and then that causes the prey population to drop. Well, then the wolves starve and the wolf population drops. So predator and prey relationships are great balancing relationships that balance those two populations in an ecosystem. They're very important. So I hope that helps wrap up, re-explain, and clarify some factors about carrying capacity, the types of growth that we see in a carrying capacity curve, and some of the factors that can affect carrying capacity.